Welcome back to the deep dive. We love to take your requests and well this one is really something special.
Yeah, this is definitely unique.
It is. One of our listeners sent us this document. It's called 14104072 Reptilians in the Matrix.pdf and wants us to kind of unpack it for them.
It's a fascinating document. It really is. It's a wild ride, to say the least.
Yeah, it dives into all these different theories about reincarnation and conspiracies and hidden truth. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
Absolutely. And it attempts to present these ideas and not just as like isolated theories, but as a connected narrative.
Right, right.
It argues that individuals retain like recognizable traits across lifetimes.
So to help us navigate all this, we've brought in an expert.
Well, I don't know about expert, but I've definitely spent some time with this document.
You definitely have. And you know a thing or two about history, belief systems, and pop culture. And this document has got all of that in spades.
It's a real blend, that's for sure. It's definitely not your average Tuesday read.
No, not at all.
But that's what makes it so interesting, right?
Exactly. So let's dive right in.
Okay, let's do it.
The document really centers around this guy named Brian Stalin, who calls himself a past life expert.
Right. He's kind of the central figure in all of this.
Yeah, he claims to have conducted thousands of past life readings using this method he calls mental dowsing.
Mental dowsing. It's not your typical hypnosis or anything like that. He says he uses psychic impressions to tap into those past lives.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the document doesn't really go into the specifics of how this mental dowsing works.
Right. It's a bit vague on the details, which might raise some eyebrows for anyone looking for like a scientific explanation.
Definitely. But hey, that's part of what makes this deep dive so fun, right? We're exploring the unconventional, the unexplained, the maybe even the unbelievable.
Absolutely. And even though the document doesn't present like scientific evidence for this mental dowsing method, it is intriguing to think about how Brian Stalin positions it within a broader context of divination practices.
Okay, I see what you mean, like how tarot cards or runes rely on those external tools. But he's claiming to access this information directly.
Exactly. It's like he's saying he has this direct line to the past, to these past lives.
Okay, so for the sake of this deep dive, we're going to take a leap of faith here and assume that Brian Stalin's insights are at least worth exploring.
Yeah, let's roll with it and see where it takes us.
All right, so he makes some pretty bold claims about these past life connections, right? Like
Yeah.
specific people being reincarnated as other specific people.
Oh, absolutely. The document is packed with examples. It's one of the things that makes it so much fun to read. You just never know who's going to pop up next as somebody's past life.
Right, so give us some of those examples.
Okay, so one of the claims is that John Russell, the fourth Duke of Bedford, was reincarnated as the actor Donald Pleasance.
Donald Pleasance? Wow. I love him. Okay, but wait. Donald Pleasance is probably most famous for playing Blofeld in those James Bond films.
Exactly. From British nobility to a supervillain trying to take over the world. Talk about a career change, right?
That's a huge shift. It's like a cosmic demotion or something.
Maybe. Or maybe it's just a sign that even in past lives, we can't resist a little bit of drama.
Okay, that's a good point. But wouldn't that mean that a huge chunk of the world's population would have to be reincarnated as actors? I mean, there are a lot of actors out there.
That's true. That's a sharp observation. The document doesn't really address that. It doesn't quite explain why it focuses on these particular figures.
So what makes these reincarnation examples stand out for Brian Stalin? Why these people?
Well, it seems to be because of their connections to power dynamics and these larger conspiracies that he's outlining in the document. He's drawing these connections between seemingly unrelated people like a duke and a Bond villain to suggest that there's this deeper pattern at play.
Fascinating. So it's not just about reincarnation, it's about reincarnation influencing power structures and global events.
Exactly. It's like he's saying that these individuals, regardless of what they're doing in this life, are bound to these certain roles because of who they were in past lives.
Okay, so give us another example.
All right, so another one that really jumped out at me was the claim that Charles Taze Russell, the founder of the movement that later became the Jehovah's Witnesses, was reincarnated as Hugo Weaving.
Hugo Weaving, wait, the guy from The Matrix, Agent Smith.
Yes, the one and only.
Whoa, okay. So a religious leader becomes a character known for representing, like, control and conformity.
Mm-hmm.
Is that just a coincidence, or is this document implying something deeper about these reincarnations?
That's a really good question. It's one of the things that this document raises without directly answering. It
Interesting.
presents these examples as evidence for these broader claims, but it doesn't always delve into the potential symbolism or the why behind these specific pairings.
So we're left to ponder those connections ourselves. But speaking of connections, the document goes beyond just these individual examples, and
Yeah.
it introduces the idea of this thing called the Russell bloodline.
The Russell bloodline, right. It claims that this bloodline is one of 13 Illuminati satanic bloodlines. Now that's where things start to get really interesting.
Okay, so for our listeners who might not be familiar with the Illuminati, can you give us like a quick rundown? Because they pop up a lot in conspiracy theories, right?
Oh yeah, they're a staple. Basically, the Illuminati is often depicted as this secretive group, like this super powerful, shadowy organization pulling the strings of world events from behind the scenes.
So they're like the puppet masters of the world.
Right. That's the idea anyway.
Okay, so how does the Russell bloodline tie into all of this?
Well, by linking figures like the Duke of Bedford and Charles Taze Russell to this alleged bloodline, the document is trying to suggest this continuous thread of influence and power that transcends individual lifetimes.
I see, I see. It's like saying these people, regardless of their reincarnation, are destined to play significant roles on the world stage because of this bloodline.
Exactly. And it's all tied to this idea of the Illuminati working behind the scenes to manipulate global events and maintain control.
Okay, so we have reincarnation potentially dictating global power dynamics. That's pretty intense. But this document doesn't stop there, does it? It goes even further,
Oh,
right?
yeah, we're just getting
It
started.
brings reptilians into the mix.
Reptilians. It wouldn't be a good conspiracy theory without them, right?
Right. So for those who haven't gone down that particular rabbit hole, what's the deal with reptilians?
Okay, so the basic idea is that many powerful people, even world leaders, are actually reptilian beings disguised as humans, or they're like controlled by these reptilians.
Reptilian overlords secretly controlling the world. Sounds like something out of a science fiction movie.
Right. But for people who believe in this theory, it's not fiction, it's a hidden reality that's being kept from us.
Okay, so how does this document tie reptilians into everything else we've been talking about?
Well, it specifically mentions this guy named David Icke. He's like the king of the reptilian conspiracy theory. He's been talking about this for years.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
He claims that these reptilian figures include members of the British royal family and other influential families like the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, all these big names that have been at the center of conspiracy theories for a long time.
So the document is saying that these alleged reptilian bloodlines are somehow connected to the Illuminati and the whole reincarnation thing.
Exactly. It's like it's trying to create this big web, this interconnected network of power and control that spans across history and even into other dimensions.
So we're talking about a world where reincarnation isn't just a spiritual concept, but a tool for these powerful beings to maintain control across generations. It's a pretty wild picture they're painting here.
It definitely is. And it plays into this deep-seated fear that many people have about hidden forces manipulating our world.
Right, right. And that fear is only amplified when you bring in ideas like mind control,
Ah, yes, mind control. That's another big one that this document touches on.
because it claims that tools like Hollywood and the music industry are being used for mind control, right?
Exactly. Like these powerful forces are using entertainment to influence the masses and make us more compliant with their agenda.
Whoa, okay. So are they saying that, like, Beyonce is a reptilian overlord secretly programming us through catchy tunes?
Well, not exactly. While the document does mention those industries as tools of control, it doesn't really get into specifics about, which celebrities are involved or how this mind control supposedly works.
So it's more like a general warning about the power of media and entertainment to influence our thoughts and behaviors.
Right. It's tapping into this suspicion that many people have about the messages that are being fed to us through popular culture.
That's interesting. But it seems like we need more information to really understand what they're getting at with this whole mind control thing.
I agree. But it's definitely something to think about, especially as we consume more and more media every day.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Reincarnation, the Illuminati, reptilians, mind control. This document is really throwing a lot at us. But before we get too carried away, I think it's important to step back and consider the source of all this information.
You're absolutely right. We have to remember that this document is based on Brian Stullen's interpretations of his mental dowsing and his supposed ability to access these Akashic records, which, as we discussed earlier, are not exactly scientifically validated methods.
Yeah, and we also have to remember that this document is just one perspective, one interpretation of reality. It's important to consider other viewpoints and to approach all of this with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Absolutely. Critical thinking is key when dealing with any kind of information, especially when it comes to these kinds of extraordinary claims.
Well said. So listeners, keep that in mind as we continue our deep dive into this fascinating and, let's be honest, pretty wild document.
Stay tuned because there's a lot more to unpack.
We'll be right back after a quick break.
And, speaking of outlandish ideas, let's get to the document's claims about this 1960s British TV series, The Prisoner. In your request, you specifically asked us to take a close look at this, and trust me, it's where things take a particularly fascinating turn.
Okay, The Prisoner, right? I remember that show. It's about like this secret agent. He gets trapped in this mysterious village and he's constantly trying to escape, and his captors are trying to like break him psychologically. It's a pretty intense show, but what could that possibly have to do with reincarnation and conspiracies?
Well, according to the document, the cast and creators of The Prisoner weren't just actors and filmmakers. They were like a reincarnated soul group with this shared destiny.
A soul group with a shared destiny. That's a pretty big claim.
Yeah.
Okay, so where does this shared destiny come from?
Well, that's where it gets even weirder. It claims that their destiny stems from their past lives as members of the Prussian royal family.
The Prussian royal family. Whoa. Okay. So they're saying that these British actors and filmmakers were once Prussian royalty. That's a pretty big jump.
It is, and it gets even more specific than that. Remember William I of Prussia?
William I, remind me.
Well, he was the king of Prussia in the mid-1800s, instrumental in unifying Germany.
Oh, right. Okay, and what does he have to do with the prisoner?
Well, the document claims that he was reincarnated as Michael Robbins, the actor who played Arthur in that British sitcom On the Buses.
Wait, On the Buses? What does that have to do with anything?
Well, bear with me because this is where it starts to get really interesting. So the document then goes on to make a connection between William I's brother, King Frederick William I of Prussia, and, Benny Hill.
Benny Hill, the comedian, the one with the crazy chase scenes and the goofy music.
Uh,
You're kidding, right?
And I wish I was. That's exactly what the document claims. It even suggests that Benny Hill's distant relative Australian actress Holly Valance was Elizabeth Ludovica of Bavaria in a past life, the woman who married King Frederick William I.
So they're connecting a British comedian, an Australian actress, and Prussian royalty all through reincarnation. That's quite a lineage. But how does the prisoner fit into all of this?
Oh, we're getting there. So the document also claims that Red Varney, who played Stan in On the Buses, was the reincarnation of Frederick William III of Prussia, William I's son, and it also points to George Markstein, one of the co-creators of The Prisoner, claiming that he was once Frederick William II of Prussia.
Okay, so we have all these actors from both The Prisoner and On the Buses who are supposedly linked through past lives as members of the Prussian royal family. It's like they're trying to create this huge historical puzzle with reincarnation as the key to unlocking all these hidden connections.
Exactly. And it does make you wonder if there's something to this idea of soul groups reincarnating together to fulfill some kind of shared purpose.
Yeah, that's a pretty mind-blowing concept. But what about Patrick McGoohan? He's like the star of The Prisoner. Where does he fit into all of this?
Well, that's where things get really juicy. Remember Frederick William II, George Markstein's alleged past life?
Yeah.
Well, he had this mistress named Wilhelmine Encke, who was later given the title Countess Lichtenau.
Ooh, a royal mistress. That definitely sounds like a story in itself. But what does this have to do with Patrick McGoohan?
The document alleges that Patrick McGoohan is the reincarnation of Wilhelmine Encke. So you see, it's like this cosmic soap opera with all these past lives and secret relationships, and then this TV show that kind of explores these themes of control and hidden agendas. It's wild.
It definitely is. But we have to remember that this is all based on Brian Stahlin's mental dowsing and his supposed access to the Akashic records, which, we can't really verify.
Of course. You're right to be skeptical. But even if we take all of this with a grain of salt, it does raise some pretty interesting questions.
Like what?
Well, could these actors on some subconscious level be channeling these echoes of their past lives into their performances?
That is interesting.
Is it possible that they're drawn to certain roles or certain narratives because of these past life connections? Think about it. The Prisoner is all about this guy who's trapped and trying to break free from the system of control. And maybe on some level that resonates with the alleged past life of these actors who were once part of this powerful royal family.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And it makes you wonder if maybe creativity and inspiration might have deeper roots than we realize. Like maybe they're tapping into experiences from these past lives.
Right. And while we can't definitively prove or disprove any of this, it's at least thought-provoking, it encourages us to think outside the box and consider these different possibilities about the nature of reality and the connections between our past lives and our present experiences.
Well, this deep dive is definitely challenging my perceptions of history and entertainment, but I'm ready to keep exploring. We've covered reincarnation, secret societies, reptilians, and now this whole connection to the prisoner. What else does this document delve into?
Well, remember those claims about mind control. That's another thread that runs throughout this document, weaving together these different elements into this, tapestry of suspicion and hidden agendas.
You're right. We haven't really gotten into the specifics of those mind control claims yet.
But yeah.
And the document gets pretty specific, right? Pointing to things like Hollywood and the music industry, and even specific books as tools of mind control.
Yeah, it doesn't just give us these vague warnings either. It calls out specific people, and well, that's where things get really interesting.
All right, so let's get into the document's take on all this stuff about spiritual movements and figures. We've already talked about its suspicions about hypnosis and deep trance channeling and, the New Age movement in general. It really seems like this document is pretty critical of anything that falls outside of mainstream spiritual beliefs.
Yeah, you're picking up on a key theme here. The document is positioning itself as like a revealer of hidden truths, right? And part of that involves exposing what it sees as deceptive or even straight up manipulative spiritual practices. Remember, A Course in Miracles, that spiritual text we mentioned earlier.
Right, A Course in Miracles. It's supposed to offer a path to spiritual awakening and inner peace and all that. It's gotten pretty popular over the years, but this document definitely seems to see it as something a lot more sinister.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely not a fan.
So what's the big issue with A Course in Miracles? I mean, are they saying it's just another Illuminati trick to control our minds?
That's the gist of it, yeah.
Mm.
Although it frames it in kind of a more roundabout way. It acknowledges that the book was channeled by this woman named Helen Schucman.
Okay, but then what?
But then it claims that this channeling was like manipulated or influenced by some outside force. It even suggests that it might have been a CIA operation designed for mind control.
Whoa, hold on. They're saying a spiritual text about love and forgiveness is a CIA mind control tool. That's a pretty huge accusation, don't you think? Is there anything in the document to back that up, or is it just like throwing that out there?
It's definitely a bold claim, and to be honest, the document doesn't offer any concrete evidence. It does connect this claim to a guy named William Thetford, who worked with Schucman on A Course in Miracles. And remember, the document claims that Thetford was the reincarnation of George Hamilton Gordon, the 4th Earl of Aberdeen, who was involved in British foreign affairs.
So they're implying that Thetford's past life somehow connects to this alleged CIA plot with A Course in Miracles. It's a bit of a stretch, isn't it?
It definitely requires some loops of logic, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But, that's kind of how this document operates. It connects these seemingly disparate dots, drawing these lines between people and events and ideas to create this, like, web of suspicion.
Right. It's all about creating connections, even if those connections seem pretty far-fetched.
Exactly. And, it doesn't stop with Thetford. The document also goes after Helen Schucman herself, claiming that she was a reincarnation of Henry Temple III, Viscount Palmerston, who was also a British prime minister.
So they're trying to discredit A Course in Miracles by associating it with these figures who might be seen as part of the establishment, right?
That's exactly it. It's playing into this pre-existing suspicion that a lot of people have about authority figures and institutions. It's like they're saying, look, even your spiritual beliefs are being manipulated by these powerful forces.
It's definitely a clever tactic, and it's making me think twice about everything I read and everything I believe. This document is making me seriously question where information comes from and what agendas might be behind it.
Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? I mean, a healthy dose of skepticism is always a good thing, especially in this day and age where information is everywhere and it's hard to know what to trust.
That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, but before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's get back to the document's methodology for a minute.
Yeah.
It relies so much on Brian Stollen's mental dowsing, and it also mentions tapping into the Akashic records. Can you remind us what those are again and why they might be problematic as sources of information?
Sure. So as we talked about before, the Akashic records are this concept that pops up in various esoteric traditions. They're often described as a universal library that contains a record of like literally everything that's ever happened, every thought, every action, every event.
Right, it's like a cosmic internet where you can Google anything that's ever existed.
Exactly. But here's the thing, even the document acknowledges that accessing these records is really tough and it's super prone to distortion, So it's like they're using this source of information that they themselves admit is unreliable.
Yeah, that does seem like a bit of a contradiction. It's like saying, hey, trust me, I got this information from this super secret library that no one else can access. But also, that library might be full of lies.
It does make you wonder, right? And it raises questions about the document's overall reliability.
For sure. So where does that leave us? We've gone through this document's claims about reincarnation and secret societies and mind control, and we've even gotten into its interpretations of spiritual movements and texts. It's been quite a journey, and honestly, I'm still not entirely sure what to make of it all.
And that's okay. I don't think anyone's expecting you to walk away with all the answers.
Well, that's good to hear, because I definitely don't have them.
This document isn't really about providing definitive answers. It's more about making us think critically about history and power and maybe even the nature of reality itself. And it definitely reminds us that there are a lot of different ways of interpreting the world, even if those interpretations seem a bit out there sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in our own beliefs and perspectives, and it's good to be reminded that there are other ways of seeing things.
Exactly. And this document, with its mix of reincarnation and conspiracies and spiritual stuff, it's a good example of how people create narratives to try and make sense of the world.
Well, this deep dive has been a real mind bender. I'm not sure I buy everything this document's selling, but I appreciate its willingness to challenge conventional thinking and, make us think outside the box.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, that's what these deep dives are all about, right? They're about expanding our horizons, questioning our assumptions, and having these conversations about complex and often controversial topics.
Well said. So to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into 14104072 Reptilians in the Matrix.pdf. Keep those questions coming. We love exploring these weird and wonderful corners of the world with you.
And remember, keep an open mind, but don't forget to bring your critical thinking skills along for the ride.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.